Great. Thank you. And I want to start off with an example and then maybe get to a question, if you will. The Clean Trucks program, implemented maybe, 8-10 years ago, if you will, at the very start. I think that's been a successful effort. I know there was a lot of concern at the beginning, but it seems that industry was a partner with the various regulatory agencies to make that happen. Now, when you drive around Long Beach, you don't see a truck that's more than, 5 years old, give or take, right? So, again, I think a successful effort, but that was a partnership with regard to the financing and some of the costs associated with getting us to switch over. So would this plan be a regulatory document, and would it otherwise prevent some of the partners from securing dollars to switch over to some of the changes we might be calling for in this? How would this all flush out in the end? Or is this, hey, this is a new regulation, industry, you're on your own, or might we partner, as we have in the past with, say, the Clean Trucks program?
Yes, thanks, Member. And I do want to comment on the point that you made, which is really an excellent point in terms of the ports. Long Beach, LA, over about a 10-year period, there's been a reduction of emissions, diesel particulate, and nearby risk. And this is basically a risk that generally it's disadvantaged communities, a disadvantage we're exposed to, about at 80%. The risks are still high, still too high, but the benefits of what really was, as you point, a collaboration, which really consisted of incentives, regulation, partnership with the ports, significant voluntary action in terms of the ports and various partners. But embedded in your question is the value and the importance of partnerships moving forward. So when we think about the plan is not a regulation, the freight action plan that we're talking about, but it clearly is indicating where do we see opportunities for improvements and reductions. The next question is, what is the correct instrument for doing so? And that clearly includes incentives, regulation, and looking for the right balance. That's part of the engagement through the workshop process and from the stakeholders. But the primary point that you made, and it's the one that we're looking to build on, is the importance of those partnerships with industry and others, because we think we'll end up with better outcomes, better recommendations, and more effective implementation.
Okay, I appreciate your approach. With that, I guess the concern that I hear sometimes is it starts with a plan and then it ends up with a regulation. So I just think we need to watch the process here for sure. I look at the Clean Trucks program. That was pretty obvious what you had to do, but if you move towards something like a facility cap, how would that translate into action on the ground as a partnership? How would that look, if it were a partnership? And we don't have to decide that today for sure. I'm not asking you to comment on that necessarily, other than we need to be creative. We need to be, at least have some off-ramps if we need them, for sure. We need to have check-ins. We also need to be open to innovation. We talked about the shore power in the ports. Recently, there's been some innovation in that area, right, that might save us a lot of dollars with regard to, the infrastructure, putting in those power lines and then hooking them up to the ships. There's been some new technology that would, maybe work a little better, actually capture more emissions, as I understand it, at least. And I know that's come before your specific agency, a couple of those efforts. So again, I thank you. Stakeholder input, please, because I'm ultimately responsible for what you do. So with that, thank you.
Very well said. So I'm going to kind of ask this question of Mr. Corey and Mr. Kelly. Help me understand, we have regions like SCAG that have major investments in planning for freight. Are we trumping their efforts with the governor's plan? And why should we demand SCSs if we aren't going to rely on them? And what about the projects in the existing state freight plan?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a shot at that. First, I think we should be clear that there's nothing that would come out of this plan that would say if you have a project in a sustainable communities plan that somehow it's not eligible. They have developed regional plans and regional priorities. Speaking in part to Mr. O'Donnell's question, one of the things about the timeliness of this plan is that it's an opportunity to express what the state's looking for in terms of highest and best use of state funds to develop partnerships and to deliver transportation projects. I would hope that aligns well with what's in a local or regional plan. I think in many cases it will. I use Prop 1B as the example coming into this because I think it provided the precedent that we want to learn from and work off of and repeat, frankly, in this effort, where folks step forward and we have the opportunity to tell them with some certainty what the state's looking for in terms of the types of freight projects going forward that give us the biggest bang for our public buck.
Thank you very much. Ms. Avdis, since you head up GoBiz, I'm going to direct this question to you. What specifically is being done to ensure this plan enhances California's economic competitiveness and we don't leave shippers going for other ports in the United States?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in your opening remarks where you said one size doesn't fit all. You're absolutely correct. And, you know, each sector and each group within each sector will be impacted very differently. And so our approach is obviously having our regular meetings with our stakeholders and understanding some of their concerns. But really, we need to understand the immediate impacts of the targets that are set forward in order for us to really think about the impacts they're going to have in the short term and how the industry continues to change their business model as they grow. This will end up impacting their future competitiveness. And so that's why we have enlisted the support of the Peter Drucker Graduate School of Management for assistance so that once we understand what the targets are, we work very closely with industry in analyzing that data and really putting together a future path of how we address these issues.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any kind of time frame that you would be looking at this metrics coming forward?
As soon as the targets are brought forward, we will immediately start working on them.
Any other questions of the panel going forward? Any thoughts? So, go ahead, Ms. Campos.
To follow up, you are talking about as soon as the targets are brought forward. Is there a consensus, or how will you determine that if there is disagreement on what the targets should be as we move forward in this plan? Like, does it have to be a consensus, or is it, how are you collectively saying this is what we want to put forward?
Well, do you want to?
Because it's never easy where, you know, you may have a particular group that may say, well, that doesn't work for us, even though, how are you collectively agreeing what's going to be brought forward?
Sure. In fact, we looked around because several of us could respond to this because we have targets for our respective organizations. But I'll take a shot at the overall and response.
Well, that's what I'm looking for, the overall.
And it really is one of stakeholder process. It's what are the recommended targets? What is the underlying assumptions and rationale? And that's really part of the public process. The workshops that we're going to begin later this week are identifying draft targets and talking about the underlying assumptions and the rationale and documentation for them. That to me is where the exchange is going to happen. We have some back and forth in terms of, because I think there are folks that will have a different perspective, a different opinion. Let's get it out. Let's have that discussion. Let's document their perspective, and often that process leads to adjustments based on the underlying input. The extent that there's a conflict or a significantly different perspective, you document that in the report. You document to me, here's what we arrived at, here's our rationale for our recommendation, and you fairly characterize the difference of, if there's a difference of perspective.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add one thing to that? I also think what's important in that process is not just going through that analytical stage and that analysis, but to also identify those areas where we can neatly, for lack of a better term, partner with our partners to get the objectives done. And again, not to harp on the 1B example, but I think that provided exactly the kind of partnership we're looking for here. The state does have an opportunity to not just set these, but also help them be delivered. And when I think about the availability of federal freight funds, the opportunity for state freight funds to come forward, what local governments are doing with sales tax money and other things increasingly directed at freight, there's an opportunity to develop a partnership to see these things achieved.
Thank you.
Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I missed it, but did anyone mention, especially ARB's person, a target date for the release of the draft plan? Do you have one in mind?
The target date for the release is it's on our. We're going through the workshop tomorrow. I think it's April.
Okay.
And predicated and built on the series of workshops that we need to have over the next few weeks, but April.
So after the workshops, or
Do the workshops. Workshops help to inform the draft. Get the
Then-
draft out. Get
okay.
comments on the draft.
good? Thank you.
Mr. Corey, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there an opportunity that your agency would be able to approach the legislature, the members of the deciding body of this state, to be able to look at that and say if this worked individually for their district or not, and have input? Would you have that ability to share that information with, say, like myself for Assembly District 11? And I look at it and say, well, it works for me here, but it doesn't work for me here because of, the impact. So that each individual, because we represent, approximately in the Assembly 500,000 people, and we want to make sure that our input is heard so that we're able to discern that this plan is something that we can support also. Would that be a possibility?
Chairman, what I'm taking that to mean, which is not an uncharacteristic model at all, which is some early briefings. Let me go back to my folks and see how we could work that.
I'd really appreciate that. I think that's wonderful to be able to have input. The freight industry has invested billions of dollars over the last several years in cleaner technologies and retrofits to meet California's air quality goals. How do you plan to assure that those who have done the right thing have the opportunity to recoup their investments and continue to employ their vehicle or equipment for its useful life? In other words, not stagnating assets. How do you plan to avoid these stranded assets in the future?
No, it's a really important question, and it's one that folks will bring up in the workshop process going forward. And few things. And Chairman, you made a comment, a remark in your opening statement about the growth of the sector, which we all want to see. And growth means more throughput, more activity, economic, robust economy and growing economy. That creates opportunities for new equipment, right? So you've got a few things going on here. You've got the need for new equipment. You also have a natural turnover of existing equipment. So one element to me at a base in terms of looking at emission reductions are how can we get, when those changes occur, when those new purchases, to the cleanest possible technology. And a key point, and this is going to come out in the workshops, is that the freight sector is not really a sector. It's a complex network, very complex, with a whole range of equipment. What we're finding in some cases, the cleanest equipment, zero emission, is viable, it works, and it's already being used today. We need to call those out. In other cases, there may not be a viable alternative to diesel, but we want that diesel to be as clean and renewable as possible. So we're looking at how do we look at that existing turnover? Are there opportunities to move that turnover faster through incentives, for instance? And for those increased demand purchases, how do we see that those are the cleanest possible technologies? So we're mindful and sensitive to the very point that you made, and that's part of the conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. And when you look at these factors going forward, I would hope that the opportunity to look at better values. If it was working with the ports, and instead of mandating the due electrification of certain components, but if we were able to remove the pinch points and let them invest in that outside of their gates on being able to move and create throughput of goods and services in an efficient manner in lieu of, maybe we attain the same thing, possibly, maybe more. But it's what's the best value for the economy, for quality of life, and for sustainability of that entity. So I'm looking forward to vigorous discussion about how we perceive what would be best value versus what ARB thinks with just the input of the professionals that you employ, but also from the legislature, also what we could do to help you either by way of legislation or through the budget. But best value to me is what I'm looking for. And maybe 100% isn't attainable because maybe it's 90% is. That last 10% is too onerous to get there. But right now 90% is pretty good, and we can work on that 10% later with technology. But I think what we're all striving for is clean air. Yeah. But how we get there. I just have one more question, but what I would ask, and Mr. Secretary, I know you probably have a million things to do, but I want to have that second panel up here, and we may have to call you back up if you have time. So, Mr. Ajisi, you mentioned pilot projects, so I'm kind of confused. My understanding is that we don't have much transportation money, i.e. AB 1591. Exactly what funds are available for these pilot projects?
Well, the pilot projects, just to be clear, are projects that we are looking at sharing up with the public and stakeholders to make sure that they make sense as with regards to the intent of the executive order, which means they have to be things that are the exemplary enough in terms of innovation, and also that they're transformative enough that it will change the system with regards to efficiency, emission reduction, and competitiveness. We're looking across the board for how we fund this. I think the projects that are coming through don't necessarily lend themselves to a specific fund source. They're across the board. They're projects that will qualify for ARB funds. They're projects that qualify for CEC funds, and definitely there are projects that are highway-type funds. So we're looking across the board to see how we might fund that. And that's why one of the elements of our review is to see where we might be able to do a leveraging of resources to get the best out of the pilot projects.
So we go through this whole process, and if we don't have the funds?
We haven't identified fund sources, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And we will be looking to identify those.
Okay, because I know that at CTC, Mr. Secretary, we just defunded $900 million in projects.
Absolutely.
So,
Mr. Chairman, this process is not going to match funds with projects directly. I think the idea is to identify pilot projects that we'd like to see move forward that capture some of the characteristics and the things that we're trying to achieve. But as he said, most of these are going to require multiple funding sources, and there's a process at the CTC for trade projects now. And so I think we'd have to go through that, or clean technology projects that got to go through an ARB approval process as well. So all of that is still to come.
Got it. Thank you. I want to thank the panel, and again, if you could hang around just in case there's questions by the committee for our second panel's discussion. Thank you very much for attending today. We're going to go on to our second panel. Kristen Deckis is the Chief Executive Officer from Point Hueneme. Fran Einman, who is the Freight God. Hassan Ikarada, the Honorable Cheryl Vegas Walker, and Gary Gallegos, the Executive Director of San Diego Association of Governments. Welcome, and thank you very much for attending our hearing. Yeah. So, as time is of an essence, we're going to start with Kristen. When you're ready. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Kristen Dekas, and I am the CEO and Port Director of the Port of Hueneme in Ventura County and the Vice President of the California Association of Port Authorities. I also have the privilege of serving on 2 federal Secretariat-appointed committees, including the National Freight Advisory Council and the Maritime Transportation System National Advisory Council. Today, I thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on behalf of California's 11 commercial, publicly owned ports. California is home to the most productive system of ports in the nation, including 3 of America's largest container ports and a diverse system of niche ports. More than 40% of containerized cargo entering the United States arrives at California ports, and nearly 30% of the nation's exports flow through ports in the Golden State. Together, our ports serve as a gateway to our freight system, which is responsible for 1/3 of the state's economy and jobs, with freight-dependent industries accounting for over $700 billion in revenue and more than $5 million in direct jobs. Our ports have enjoyed long and productive relationships with the state agencies assigned by the governor to develop the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. The governor and these agencies should be commended for addressing what is very important and a complex undertaking. We have worked closely and successfully for many years with the Air Resources Board, local air quality management districts, and community interests to improve air quality in and around our facilities. We are proud of our efforts as responsible environmental stewards and of the tremendous air quality improvements achieved by the freight industry over the last decade. Since 2005, our large ports report emissions reductions on the order of 80% in particulate matter, 90% in SOx, 50% in NOx, as well as significant greenhouse gas reductions. Our niche ports are making important improvements as well. At the Port of Hueneme, for example, we are reducing emissions by using cleaner burning fuels in vessels and equipment used to move cargo, using energy-efficient utilities and alternative fuels, replacing conventional diesel with low-emission propane fuel trucks, and electrifying cargo handling equipment. Our shoreside power program, which greatly reduces emissions from vessels, is expected to provide a 55% reduction in greenhouse gases, a 98% reduction in NOx, and a 92% reduction in diesel particulate matter over the life of the program. Our port shoreside power project, according to the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District, is the most impactful in the history of our county. These remarkable improvements, however, have come at a great cost, estimated at more than $5 billion. California-only costs have significant impact on our ability to compete. California faces unprecedented competition from neighboring countries and from states around the nation. The pending opening of the widened Panama Canal may have a significant impact on trade-related competition as well. We are pleased that the governor recognized the importance of our freight system to California's economy and that he included establishing clear targets to increase economic competitiveness in his executive order. We don't believe the executive order was intended to provide a menu of options for state agencies to choose from, but rather directed that they will include increasing economic competitiveness in the plan. We strongly encourage the state to undertake a serious effort to establish appropriate economic baselines and metrics and conduct the underlying economic study and analysis necessary to assure California's freight system remains healthy and vibrant. We believe there are many things the state can do to improve our economic competitiveness. Two broad areas of interest come immediately to mind. Assure that any related regulations are implemented in a transparent and predictable manner and phased in appropriately over time while providing certainty to the industry. And two, provide significant state resources to assist with the transition to a zero and near zero emission systems, including taking a leading role in technology development. Our association supports the transition to zero and near zero emission technologies, and our ports are engaged in significant efforts to facilitate that transition. We think it is critical that the state proceed in a thoughtful, measured, and balanced way to assure that we do not harm our economy. The diversion of a cargo away from California will have a detrimental effect in a number of ways, including the potential loss of jobs and wages, as well as state and local taxes. Our self-help counties, which provide a significant portion of transportation infrastructure funding via local sales tax, could be significantly affected by decreases in economic activity as well. The freight industry has recently invested billions of dollars in cleaner technologies and improvements to meet California's air quality goals. We believe it is important that we provide assurances that when industry invests in cleaner technologies, they are allowed to recoup those investments before additional requirements are imposed. Avoiding stranded assets should be a high priority as the state develops the plan. Likewise, prior to imposing requirements, we should be assured that new vehicles and equipment are technologically feasible, economically feasible, and commercially available. California ports are the greenest in the nation, and the greatest, and arguably the cleanest in the world. There is no greener way to bring cargo into our country. We are concerned with the economic implication of cargo diversion and also concerned of the possible greenhouse gas emission implications if cargo is diverted through the Panama Canal, for instance, and arrives at ports with far less stringent air quality requirements and practices. We ask you today to partner with us, with industry and community stakeholders, and with the state agencies assigned to this monumental job to assure that we develop a sustainable freight action plan that is both environmentally and economically sound. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Ms. Einman, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Frazier and members, for joining us today and hosting this. Fran Inman, speaking today on behalf of the California Transportation Commission. And as Kome Ajizi mentioned, I am the cheerleader who reminded all of us that every day is Freight Day. And I would add that the freight is our economy in motion. So I think it's important for all of us to roll up our sleeves together. As Chairman mentioned, we had a sad week at CTC last week. We were forced with a very difficult vote to reduce our STIP program fund estimate by $754 million. And that's a tough thing for all of us. And as we talk about our sustainable freight investments, when we pull back on our transportation investment, it hurts all of us. So I think that's a challenge. So let's keep our focus here and get some work done. Or as our chair of the CTC said, let's get a deal done. So anyway, I think one thing I just want to reinforce is the multimodalism from all of this, because we are, as Richard Corey mentioned, we function on a system of systems, and I like to say that we're all codependent in that, and if we don't have one of our modes highly functioning, then we're kind of all in trouble, because what really matters for all of our businesses and our communities is this end-to-end, that we really have accomplishments. And for California, as Kristen mentioned, scale matters. We have the nation's ports within our state, and we move a significant amount of the nation's goods. We've been having a lot of conversations today about international cargo, but I also want to remind everybody that we also have a huge volume of what we call domestic cargo. Hassan will probably talk to us later about our draft RTP in the Southern California region, but that plan tells us that some 85% of our goods are actually domestic freight. And so I think in the Alameda County goods movement draft plan that's up for approval, it's a similar number. So it is important to really think about that. As the executive order clearly pointed out, a third of our jobs in the state relate to this sector. So I think it really, really is important. Kristen mentioned the National Freight Advisory Committee. Our state has, fortunately, 5 members on that committee. I think it kind of points out that, at least in U.S. DOT, there was some recognition of how large an issue that is for this state. And Kristen and I actually have the pleasure and honor of serving on that committee. In their draft National Strategic Freight Plan, some of these get tough to say, and really tough to say them quickly. They told us that on average we could expect to move 66 tons of stuff per person per year, and that's up. We used to talk about 40 tons, and they're saying to us that it really is 66 tons. So if you could just imagine the way we all live our lives, we collectively are trying to move an awful lot of stuff. As also was mentioned, I think Secretary Kelly mentioned that for the first time on the national level, we do have some dedicated freight funding, and those of us that have been in the trenches on this topic for a long time are very, very excited. That's going to come to us in a couple of different manners. One is the formula work that was discussed previously, but also a competitive grant program, and we've been told that those dollars are going to start rolling out quickly with a notice of funding available. And so I do want to encourage all of our partners here today to make sure that we do a good job, because we really do need to succeed when those grants are awarded. Also, another thing that wasn't mentioned, I think, is just the magnitude of the private investments that are included. In California, we have 2 very robust Class 1 railroads, and if you look at just those individual companies' capital budgets, for last year was $6 billion for the BNSF and nearly $4 billion for the Union Pacific. And while those dollars don't all end up in California, I think it kind of shows you the magnitude of the dollars of investments that are going in, and those are just from two of our partners in the Class 1. So lots of talk about our TCIF, and the Commission is very, very proud of that program. Many of us worked on the initial Goods Movement Action Plan that I think was 2005, 2006, and really helped inform the work that we all collectively did on those bonds. And as a consequence, we had dedicated funding to these trade corridors. And the benefit from all of that, I see, is really just the partnerships we leverage. As Secretary Kelly mentioned, we had $2 billion in round numbers, and that brought in leverage more than $5 billion, so the total investment was north of $7 billion. So I think that leveraging of those dollars was very, very important, and I can tell you that our transportation partners along those corridors all put their heads together and helped us prioritize those. We, at the CTC, came up with well-vetted guidelines that helped us look at the values that we'd established in the Goods Movement Action Plan, which looked at our environmental issues as well as our throughput, velocity, reliability, safety. We haven't had much discussion today about safety, but clearly we have huge safety issues in this, and also the interregional benefits, because if anything's going to move across a city, a county, or even the state boundaries, our freight does an awful lot of that. So the economic growth, we've had lots of discussion about the economic growth, but I can't underemphasize that, and the CTC also looked at that. We also have some projects. We've talked about some of our shining stars from that. I think the Alameda Corridor East project is one that we're all very, very proud of in our state, and probably is an example that we need to emulate over and over again, because where we have huge concentration of population and we're trying to move a lot of stuff at the same time, these grade separations are so very important, and that particular entity has laser focus on getting their job done, and they've done a great job. Also, the Gerald Desmond Bridge, which is under construction, is another one of our projects that really shows the ability to come together and collaborate, and I think we need to continue to do that. So I just, on behalf of all of the CTC, we're very proud of the success. If we failed, it was probably in tooting the horn of that success, because we tended to keep our head down and get the projects delivered. Also, just want to mention that in that program, we actually had deadlines. And while those deadlines caused us all to wiggle a little bit in terms of picking up our game to meet the deadlines, I think that whatever we do, having ourselves keep our nose to the grind is a good thing. So thank you all very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.